In this recording, I want to introduce another Maven concept, life cycles. We're going to build upon what we learned earlier about plugins and Maven artifacts and turn those into life cycles. Items we want to cover: what is a life cycle? What are the main life cycles? How can we print a life cycle? The full Maven lifecycle is defined by the Maven core star.jar and the Maven installation directory defined uh, at metainfluxuscomponents.xml. At these URLs, you will find very much the same information we're going to pull out of the XML file. So I'm just going to focus on the XML file. Myself into the Maven directory in the lib folder. Here my Maven core is 3.8.6. Inf Plexus components.xml. Drop that into the distributables folder and open that up. Okay. I know. Beginning. So that's where the life cycles are defined. There are three different life cycles defined in the components.xml file: clean, build, and site. What do each of these three life cycles do? Well, the build is a sequence of operations that Maven has come up with a standard for that takes a Java project, compiles the code, pushes the non-Java files around to a target folder that's created on the fly if it doesn't exist already, and compiles your files and assembles them there. Then the clean life cycle is for deleting that target folder and setting, basically it sets your project back to the initial state. That's not to say it does that in a source code way. It just cleans up the things that were done by the build lifecycle. And then the site lifecycle is there. That is for generating documentation. I have not used that one myself personally, and but I do think it has a bit of potential. The clean is almost small enough that you could fit it onto one slide. It's made up of three phases: pre-clean, regular clean, and post-clean. If we go back to component, notice, unfortunately, according to the format, the end tag and the next start tag are on the same line, and I'm going to leave it like that. You can see from here to through line 328, life cycle is pre-clean, clean, post-clean, and to the clean phase, we are binding the Maven Clean plugin version 2.5 and the goal of clean. Here is the phases of the default life cycle. for the build lifecycle. If you count them all up, that comes out to 22. I've left off the ending phases tag if you wanted to see it in the components.xml. Look for default. It would be good if you want to get advanced into Maven to at least understand how to find this life cycle, and maybe we'll find some other ways besides digging into this components.xml in the printing the life cycle section coming up. This bit of text, I think, was important to point out. It's pulled from the introduction to the life cycle. The phases named with hyphenated words pre, post, or process are not usually called directly from the command line. These phases sequence the build, producing intermediate results that are not useful outside the build. In the case of invoking integration test, the environment may be left in a hanging state, therefore use verify instead of integration test. When you go back to build life cycle, you see here's verify way at the end, and it comes after your integration test, because after integration test comes post integration test. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Here, I'd like to define the simplest pom.xml. This is the first time we're talking about pom.xml. We had a project tag. It's very long. And so I put the space here to mark out where we get to the regular stuff. You need a group ID, an artifact ID. I've made the group ID local.tutorial to avoid clashing with anything that might exist. Artifact ID, my project, and version 1.0. And I've also got I've called it the minimum pom.xml out in the distributable area. And then in the simplest POM work area, I just called it the pom.xml. The default packaging of a POM is jar. So right now you can see that line 10 is commented out. Now that we've got a pom.xml, I started to lay things out. We did briefly touch on this way back in the help plugin. How do you print the life cycle? Well, if you do d command equals and you point it to one of the phases, it prints out the life cycle. Yeah. Components.xml. Validate, initialize, install, deploy. Okay. Getting back into printing the life cycle from the slideshow. Can I print out the Maven life cycle? According to this URL, the top voted answer is to use this build plan Maven plugin. And from the command line, I got the expanded group artifact ID and the goal. I guess sometimes you can run it without the version number. I haven't gone into details of how that works. Or its goal prefix is build plan list. And in the distributable area, work area, printing the life cycle with build plan. All right. right, so let me go over into that simplest work area. Take this build plan, Maven build plan : list. Maven build plan : list. That's what the output looks like. You get a plugin, which is the artifact ID. You'll get a version. They'll get a goal, get an execution ID. You don't get a group ID, which is something I do not like. I've been pounding into your head about group ID, artifact ID, and version all this time. So that's the way the numbers are right now. As I've switched into the simplest POM work area, go back to the Maven help describe -d command equals compile. All right. If you didn't notice, some of these objects are no longer not defined. When we had the directory with pom.xml, a lot of not defined, but install and deploy. Here we got a process resources, a compile, process test resources, test compile, Surefire plugin, and the jar plugin. Tells us packaging is jar. Lifecycle goals change with the packaging type. The actual goals attached depends on the type of packaging the XML does. So if we go back to the pom.xml, I enable the packaging tag and I set that to war. Not much is going to change. What will change is the package goal phase. So back here, okay, package phase has changed from jar to the war plugin. And to drive that point home, I've got the jar lifecycle from this output and the war file from this output opened in Eclipse Compare Editor. And you can see describes at the top, the packaging is war, and you can see my war goal is attached to the package phase. And one other thing I want to do, let's change this packaging to POM to drive the point home. Okay. Okay, very much looking like the default. I've already pasted this into compare the POM with the jar. Packaging was POM. Processes resources is no longer defined. Compile's not defined. Test. Looking a lot like the default output. Each phase has 0 or more goals attached to it. For the life cycles that we've seen defined, they've been good about only attaching one goal to each phase. When you specify a phase on the command line, all of the previous phases of the life cycle leading up to that phase are also called. So when I run Maven install output, let me set my packaging back to jar. Maven install output.text. Okay, that output has come. You can see there is a correspondence here to what are you looking for? The life cycle, validate and initialize resources plugin. Let's see. Can we grab that? Yeah. Okay, so here was the jar output. Generate resources. We got the resources plugin. You see that. You see the compiler plugin. Comes down to test resources, test compile, test, and jar plugin and the install plugin. If I were to just call Maven compile, right, out to this work area, compile output, move that over there. Can I do that? All right, so it just did the resources and the compiler. It didn't go all the way up to install. If I were to call Maven clean install, those are phases on two different life cycles. It'll run the clean on the clean life cycle. It'll run the install on the build life cycle. If I were to do Maven compile install, then what would happen is it'd run once with the compile as the destination, and it would call the compile and process resources again when it was running the install phase. It's not smart. It's just going to run them both. So you can, when running Maven, specify multiple phases. You can specify multiple goals if you wanted to. Up until this point, I've just been talking about individual goals and individual phases. If you were so inclined to create your own custom life cycle, you might look at the URLs given there, but also keep in mind how difficult it has been to get up to this point. Is this going to benefit your team, or is this going to be something that holds them back? And that's life cycles.